This week on Quadriga, cautious Germany, the austerity standoff. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been vilified for her approach to the Eurozone debt crisis. Critics, such as Italy's Mario Monti, say her insistence on austerity is pushing the common currency to the brink of collapse. At last week's EU summit, Merkel made some concessions, but she continues to stress the need for fiscal rigour from struggling states. Not least because of pressure and legal challenges at home. But she's convinced she's on the right path to save the European idea. Why is the German government adamant about austerity? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Well, Germany might have lost the semi-final to Italy in the European Champion Footballship, but it is still the country that all other nations, particularly in Europe, look towards to solve the European debt crisis. How will it do so? And is Germany up for this task? That's what we're going to talk about today with my three guests. Welcome to Andreas Rinke, who is the chief political correspondent for the news agency Reuters in Berlin. Hannah Cleaver is the acting editor of the local.De, an online newspaper covering German news in English. And Ulrike Herrmann, who is the business correspondent for the German daily newspaper Taz. Welcome to you all. Andreas Rinke, the UK magazine, The New Statesman, had a rather interesting magazine cover depicting Chancellor Merkel as the Terminator and calling her the most dangerous German leader since Adolf Hitler, and basically demanding that she needs to be stopped with her austerity measures. What do you make of this?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's journalism, the sort of journalism which always tries to facilitate the understanding of a situation. I think this was maybe a bit over the top in describing something, that in Germany it's always very sensitive if you make any parallel to the Third Reich and Hitler. So I understand the criticism. But I think that, and that's my understanding of the German government, that they don't actually see that the reproaches Merkel are made against Merkel, that they are correct.
And before we talk about the steps that Merkel has taken and still have to take, Hannah Cleaver, the New Statesman, the cover again, the hatred, I don't want to call it hatred, but rather the resentment towards Chancellor Merkel's austerity measures, not only in the UK, but certainly in the southern European countries, are rather vast.
They are, and you can completely understand why. If you're sitting in Athens watching your business going down the tubes and unable to borrow money, unable to pay your rent, you can totally understand why Greek people would be very anti-Merkel. But the question is, what else can you expect from her? She's having to take a line. She didn't want to take a line, I don't think, which is why she's done this hesitating game. But who else are you going to ask? Who else has got that much money to be able to do anything? And if you're going to borrow money from somebody, you have to give them some say in what you're going to do.
Well, Ulrike Herrmann, Chancellor Merkel is a bit in a rough spot, isn't she? Because at the end of the day, she's damned if she does and damned if she doesn't. At the end of the day, everybody looks towards her for leadership. Do you think the criticism that she's receiving from other European nations is fair?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, what's true is that it's Germany who will decide on whether the euro will crash or not. I mean, we are the biggest economy in Europe, and of course it's us who decide. So it's really very obvious and fair that everyone concentrates on Merkel. But you're right. I mean, what is she to do? I mean, whatever happens, in the end she will be criticized. But I think the only way to save the euro is, in fact, to allow for more money to be spent on the south. I think that these austerity programs just aggravate the problem, because then the economy slumps, and then, of course, with a shrinking economy, you're not able to pay back your debt. So it's, in a way, this whole austerity measures are really crazy, because instead of reducing the risk for Germany, the risk is being increased.
May I step in? To the
of course, we never agree.
To the New Statesman again, first. I'm not so sure that what the New Statesman had on its cover, it's actually the opinion of a large part of the European population, because there had been a poll by the Pew organization just published last week, where people in different European countries were asked about what they think of the leadership of Obama, but also of Merkel. There's one country where it's a very negative image, that's Greece. So you're correct, but there she was described for a long time now as being the, well, Nazi again, or the Terminator, or something like that. But interestingly enough, in most other countries, it's at least split. So half of the population has a positive and half of the population a rather negative image of Merkel. So I think we can't really rely only on these covers like the New Statesman to make a lot of, who create a lot of interesting to see how people actually think about her. And I remember that last year in France, there was a poll between whom do you trust more for economic reforms, Sarkozy at that time or Merkel? And Merkel won. So even in other countries, and France as well, I think there's, among normal people, quotation marks, there's an understanding that maybe you have to do some reforms to make sure that your country is running again.
Hannah Cleaver, Chancellor Merkel is in a bit of a strange spot, isn't she? Because she's supposed to lead. Germany is supposed to lead. And German leadership, as we know, is something that doesn't come naturally, if you will, to this country. So at the end of the day, it wasn't really well equipped to lead this institution, the EU, was it?
Well, no, and it hasn't been expecting to. Germany has shied away from leadership positions within Europe for the last nearly 70 years with very good reason, and that's partly what the EU was designed to do, was to tie this colossus of economic power into the rest of Europe, to make it safe for everybody else, to now enable Germany to join the table of right-thinking, upright nations again. And that's worked. But that's worked to such a degree that Germany has now become normal enough to, and has reunited itself, has now become normal enough to be a candidate to lead the EU, and has become normal enough for everybody else to think, okay, well, Germany, they're not going to invade us, and they've got all the money, so we can look to them for leadership. But there is, I think, over the last 60-plus years, becoming an ingrained shying away from that within German politics, within the German society. And that's now what Merkel has to jump over. She doesn't really have a choice. She's going to have to step into these very big shoes that have been put outside her door, because nobody else has got big enough feet to do it.
Sorry, I'm tempted to interrupt or to answer again, because I think it's a misunderstanding of how the European Union actually works. The European Union exists of 27 nations and the Eurozone of 17 nations. No country, not even Germany, is big enough to solely lead in the European Union, because these are democracies. And I remember that when Sarkozy and Merkel made some agreements in Deauville, that's not long ago, that's 1.5 years ago, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of criticism of other countries that these two nations, and there were two, were trying to lead. So if anybody expects, and I think it doesn't actually matter who is the chancellor in Germany, that Germany is going to resolve the problems of Europe, I think it's a failure from the beginning. It's the country is not, and not only economically, but also politically not able to do it alone. So it has to seek partners. That will be a renewed French-German cooperation, and it will be what we have seen, not really reported, an alliance with the northern and eastern states, because, interestingly enough, Germany is not alone in this debate. I mean, the southern states might be the loudest, but just in the last days, there were several ministers, prime ministers from other countries here in Berlin, and they expressed exactly the same, ideas how you could resolve the debt crisis in Europe.
But Ulrike Herrmann, it is undeniable that Germany if it is not the leader, it is certainly one of the leading nations.
Sure.
Well, you cannot do anything against Germany because it's just the biggest economy. And the problem is that the other big economies in the Eurozone, which is Italy, Spain, and France, they are all in a kind of crisis. So, and the small countries Mr. Rink is referring to, like Finland or Slovakia or the Netherlands, do not really count, just for the simple reason that there's just hardly any population there and hardly any economic power. So it's going to be those 4 countries who will decide on the euro course. Now, if 3 of them are more or less in a crisis and just 1 is not, I mean, I think it's obvious what is going to happen. Germany will have to decide whether, I mean, it's really this way around, whether Germany will have to decide whether Germany wants to stay within the euro. I mean, in the United States, there's a broad discussion about why is not Germany leaving the euro. If Germany is against everything that it would save the euro, so why do they not just leave? And I mean, that is a really good question. And of course, Germany does not leave the euro because the advantages of this currency are so evident. I mean, we are exporting most of our goods to the euro countries. We would lose a lot of money if we went out of the euro because then all the money we have in France and Italy and Spain would be lost. I mean, we were the ones who gave away all these debts or who gave these loans that now can't be paid back. So. But, you know, as soon as the Germans understand, I think, that how profitable the euro is for them, I think they will decide on saving it.
But do you think it's fair to say that the enthusiasm for the euro within and among the German public is slowly waning?
Well, yeah, it is slowly waning, but still a majority wants to keep the euro. That's no question. The Germans would be for the, you know, I think that if you put a question to the Germans like this, do you want to leave the euro? No one would want to take this risk. And I think, you know, the reunification of Germany cost 1 trillion euro. And I think, and, you know, the German economy did not break down or suffer. It was possible for the Germans to pay these trillion. And I think that the euro, the saving of the euro, might cost as much in the long run of 20 years. And I think it would be a good investment. And I think you have to somehow tell the Germans that they have to invest into the euro, just as they invested in the reunification.
But Hannah Cleaver, the dilemma still remains the same, doesn't it, for Merkel? Because if she exerts too much pressure on her partners, then it's the overbearing, imposing Germany. If she does too little, then Germany shying away from its responsibilities.
Well, that's your damned if you do, damned if you don't problem again. And Germany, being Germany with its particular history within Europe, has a kind of double jeopardy here in that, you know, if they do anything that upsets anybody, which anything they do will, then everybody points to them going, oh, it's the Germans again. But quite apart from that, so you've got the problem of Germany being, I think, reluctantly but pushed into this leadership position, which I think Merkel and the German body politic will have to take up. Apart from that, or extra to that, you then have the changing division within Europe between left-wing and right-wing governments, and that landscape has just shifted. So you actually now have not only Merkel coming in as an unpopular German, stepping into these leadership shoes, and nobody really cares whether she's reluctant to or not, because she's going to have to do it. Add to that the fact that she's conservative, and that is now in opposition to a great move within certainly France and Spain and various other places which are moving towards the left. And you have another layer of opposition and conflict within Europe and between Germany, the paymaster, and everybody else.
No, I think that doesn't matter at all, because those countries that are most or those leaders in the south that are most opposed to Merkel are all conservatives. I mean, Monti is conservative, and Rajoy, and the Spanish Rajoy is conservative. It's not a question of whether you are left or right. It's a question of interests. And of course, the southern countries have a different interest from what Merkel thinks that her interests are.
Sure, but I think, I mean, the New Statesman cover with Merkel as Terminator, that was very clearly not just because she's German and because she's having to do things, but it's also because of her political direction. I think that's also going to play a part. She's also got to play to her domestic audience and try to give herself a profile within German politics with the election coming up next year. And I think you are going to see a split. I mean, certainly Germany, France are no longer reading on the same page.
But the interesting thing in Germany is that the opposition always agrees with Merkel. That just shows again, I think, that it is not a question of left or right.
I would agree completely. It's not a question of political directions, maybe about concepts, how an economy should be run. But it's, first of all, here in Germany, and that will decide the election next year, about German political interests. And you see that in the polls as well. There's a large majority among all parties, even the Social Democrats and the Green, against Eurobonds, for example, because it's considered to be a bad idea for Germany. It's not considered to be a bad idea for some other countries. But for our taxpayers and voters, obviously a large majority resents it.
And Andreas Rinke, you already mentioned the election 2013. Chancellor Merkel is going to run again for re-election. It's a difficult task, no? On one hand, she has to appease, if you will, her European partners. But on the other hand, domestically, she also has to sort of make noise with her coalition partners from within.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation, and nobody knows now how the crisis in the Eurozone is actually developing. So we haven't talked about Greece yet. Nobody knows what's going to happen there and how much taxpayers in the north, but also in France and some other countries will have to pay for that, maybe.
And Ulrike Herrmann, it's a tough sell to the German public, no, to the German voters anyway, when it comes time to vote in 2013, to let them know that they perhaps have to make up financially for the shortages, fiscal discipline.
Yeah, of course, it's hard. But I think the way to put it to the voters is there is no cheap way to save the euro. The only question is, what is cheaper, to save the euro or to let the euro crash? And I'm convinced that it is cheaper to save the euro. And if you tell the German public that this is the cheaper way, it's not cheap, but cheaper, I think they will accept that. And the main problem for Merkel in 2013 will not be the euro crisis as the euro crisis. And it will not be the problem what happens in Greece. The main problem will be that these austerity programs in the whole of Europe start to affect the German economy. And it is very probable that in 2013 we will have a crisis here in Germany, an economic crisis with rising unemployment. And that's the most dangerous scenario for any politicians, that people here start fearing poverty. And so I think that it is really crazy from Merkel to insist on austerity in Europe, really endangering her own position in 2013. Instead, I think she should really push for stimulus programs so that in 2013 the economy in Germany is, in full drive.
The problem of the debate is a bit that we're discussing it as if it's just a political question. It's not. So I already have a problem with the word austerity, because when you actually look at what is done in Spain, for example, where you had an increase of the pensions by this conservative government, it's not only austerity measures. It's a mix. It's a mix which is different in different countries. But
they slashed down on the spending of the government, nonetheless.
Overall,
yes,
because
so
they were
austerity.
spending more money than they actually had as an income, which is a problem in the medium and long term. But I think that it's not only the position of Merkel, but actually it's the markets which are responsible for a lot of things going on in the Eurozone as it is now at the moment. And you will see that, I predict that, with Mr. Hollande. Hollande is going, after his election, to change a lot of his positions, and he already started that. They discovered a huge gap in the French budget, and I'm pretty sure that that will be a mix of tax increases and cuts to meet the deficit criteria. He's not meeting the deficit criteria because of Merkel or any German government course or demand. He's doing that because he knows that he will have to pay much more money on the markets for French credits in the future.
Hannah Cleaver, there is a sentiment out there among the German public anyway that Chancellor Merkel stands firm at first, but then in the end she always caves in. Yeah. Do you think that's fair?
Occasionally, I think that's absolutely right. And, last week when she came out of the meeting with Spain and Italy and had caved in and is now going to allow money to go straight to Spanish banks, that was a cave-in. But I think it's also partly her personal style of leadership, which is to kind of lead from the back or just kind of wait until everybody else has bashed each other to bits before she then kind of walks in looking very calm and collected, and everybody says, oh, Frau Merkel, what a wonderful tactic you've taken. So she's a waiter. She's not a man, and she's not a testosterone-fueled leader who walks in and bangs her fist on the table. That's just not her style. And I think that's often misinterpreted. But I think she has been hesitant about this simply because you're looking at vast amounts of money. And I think she waited and she looked over into the abyss of, the prospect of letting the euro fail, and she had to take a step back. But she did take that time to have a look, I think.
Yep. But I think it has also to do, I agree about the style, and I think she's formed also by the German tradition of forming coalitions. So German politicians tend to have this sort of, I see one side, I see the other side as well, and to wait for a while. But I think it's also about the German philosophy of condition setting. So step by step, they are giving more aid, and I think the ESM is actually a huge concession by the Germans, because it's now a permanent rescue umbrella, which was always rejected before. Now we voted on that, 2/3 majority, nearly all parties are part of the left, and we have it in place. So they do something, but they set conditions before, and that's exactly what happened last week on the summit as well. This direct banking recapitalization, that's a German concession, but it only comes if the others agree that we have a European supervision for banks. European supervision for banks means direct intervention rights in national sovereignty. And that's why I also think it's a caricature to say that Germans are blocking everything. They just want to make sure, this government, the former government, and I think that's the mood in the German population. They want to make sure, if we help, we want to make sure that these countries from now on behave in a way that they are going to refinance themselves.
And Ulrike Herrmann, there are some voices out there in Germany who say, why should Germany grant the solidarity? Why should we give the solidarity without getting much in return?
Well, what we get is our loans are being paid back. In fact, the money we give to the South directly flows back to Germany, into the German banks. I mean, the debt of one country is the asset of the other country. I mean, it was us, especially, who gave loans to Spain. Now, of course, everyone is very nervous whether these loans are being paid back by Spain. If we agree to help the Spanish banks or the Spanish government, then, in fact, we are helping ourselves. And that's something that is really not understood by many people, that, it's all interconnected. It's not that there is one country and here is Germany, like sitting as if it was on an island. No, we are just in the middle of this crisis.
And would you say it's a failure on the part of Chancellor Merkel and the politicians of not explaining those benefits sufficiently to the German public?
Yeah, I think it is really a failure that they do not explain to the German public that, in fact, whatever we do, we are already paying for the others. Because, one of the many things that are happening now is that all the bank customers in the South withdraw their money from their banks and transfer this money to Germany. Now, in Germany, there are billions of euros arriving from the South that are now parked here in the banks. And then, of course, this money has to be sent back by the ECB, because otherwise those southern banks would collapse. Now, of course, this means that Germany is responsible for billions and billions and billions of money that southern Europeans invested here in a way. So, if the euro crashed, we would be responsible for paying back all these euros. So, that would be so expensive to let the euro fail. That's not an alternative.
Yeah, but maybe you underestimate the Germans. Maybe they are aware of the fact that we are not alone in Europe, that we are surrounded, and it's a very open economy. Since we are an export economy, we have, I think, an understanding that there's an interconnection. And that's why even in a poll published yesterday, the large majority is still for the euro. Yes, and it's even nearly 2/3 are for a European finance minister. So there is a willingness to integrate more, not to have less Europe, but more Europe. It's only conditionality which is important. You have to set the rules first, you have to stick to the rules, and then you are able to help.
And former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt said this week that Germany must put its own interests aside for the sake of for a European interest. National interests should not matter anymore at this point, he said. What do you make of this? Is this realistic?
I think it's... We have a wonderful British saying, flannel. The generation, the previous couple of generations of German politicians had to give this kind of image of being selfless Europhiles, and this is a historical legacy and they paid lip service to it all the way through until reunification of Germany. That Germany would kind of dissolve itself within Europe and was just living for Europe. That was plainly nonsense, because it was only, as I said earlier, it was only due to Germany's embedment in Europe that Germany was able to recover, that Germany was able to rebuild and able to sit again at the table of nations and be respected and be trusted. It was always in Germany's self-interest to be very deeply integrated into Europe. It's still in Germany's self-interests, it's a national self-interest, to be in Europe, to be part of the leadership of Europe, if not the sole leader. It's just that the reasons for those national interests have changed. And so Schmidt can talk about, yes, this selfless, dissolving of Germany into Europe, but that, I mean, it's eyewash.
Andreas Rinke, Hannah Cleaver talked about the necessity for Germany to be within the European family, if you will. There are some who are saying it's also due to Chancellor Merkel's past, if you will, that she grew up in Eastern Germany, that perhaps she's lacking, if you will, the enthusiasm for this European idea, unlike her predecessors. What do you make of this? Do you think that's a valid point?
Well, maybe it was a valid point at the beginning, because everybody is influenced by its own past biography, but I don't have the feeling that it's true since Germany had the EU presidency, and that was already in 2007, because all the major integration force steps were initiated by Germany mainly, sometimes Germany and France. And again, we have this debate now. I think there was a demand by the German government that the EU institutions should look into ways how Europe can come even closer now. So I think, but it's not solely Merkel, but it's all the other parties. There's an understanding that Germany has to be more integrated into Europe.
Would you agree?
Yes, I think that's true. Mr. Rinke always stresses this point, which is right, that the Germans really insist on rules before paying. But I think the problem is that the rules they insist on are the wrong rules. I can just keep repeating me. It's really crazy to insist on austerity programs in the whole of Europe, because this is just the way into a very deep recession. And that's nothing I'm just making up, but it's you can really see it happening in the southern parts of Europe. Even the Dutch now, which have an economy that is very similar to the German one, is now in a recession. So that is really should be alarming everyone in Germany, that the Dutch are already having a deep recession. So it's really crazy what's happening.
But I think austerity is really a political battle word.
No, it's not.
Because when you actually see what is demanded also by the EU Commission for Spain and Italy now, it's mostly liberalization of labor markets, of services, things you can do without actually cutting somewhere. So it's not only austerity. I think it's a word which is used to discredit reforms.
Well, Germany certainly made large sacrifices in the past, because it's hard to imagine now perhaps, but Germany wasn't always the economic powerhouse that it is right now. Quite on the contrary, not too long ago actually it was considered to be the sick man of Europe, but due to sacrifices it made, it got to where it was today. Let's have a look at what those measures were.
Demonstrations against labour market reform, not in Greece or Spain, but in Berlin around 7 years ago. The protest took place after ordinary Germans were forced to accept painful changes as part of former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder's effort to revitalise the country's flagging economy and boost competitiveness. It's the memory of this pain and high unemployment that informs the opinions of many Germans today. We took the medicine, they say, so why can't the southern Europeans? Chancellor Merkel and her government are also genuinely concerned about Germany's ability to shoulder the burden of the euro crisis alone.
Eine Überforderung Deutschlands.
An excessive demand of Germany is just as little use as too little demand for reform commitment from our partners. And there are other problems. Parliament may have approved the new bailout mechanism, the ESM and the fiscal pact last week, but those measures are being challenged by a range of groups and individuals in the Constitutional Court who say democracy is being violated. And it's the court that will have the last word.
Well, Hannah Cleaver, we just saw Germany made big sacrifices under the so-called Agenda 2010. Lower pay, if you will, longer hours, the retirement age was pushed back. Do you think it's unreasonable for Germany to ask the same of other European nations now?
It's to be expected, I think. The Agenda 2010 was kind of Germany's little Thatcherism light, if you like. It didn't do quite as much damage to German society as what happened in the UK in the 1980s. But it has changed the face of Germany, and in many ways for the better. But I think it's also made things much more difficult for your Joe on the street. I think expecting Greece, expecting the other countries to do similar things, it's understandable because Germany has done it. But whether it's a reasonable thing to ask to ask other countries to take these steps that in some cases are really a kind of culture change, and for those countries to have these orders coming down from someone else, I think is asking them to swallow a lot.
And would you say that the prescription is not one size fits all?
No, never.
Well, I think for logical reasons, it's not possible to have the same program in the southern countries because, you know, what Germany did with this Agenda 2010 was to drive down its wages in order to export more. So we had huge export surpluses. Now, it's not possible for a whole Eurozone to consist of countries that have export surpluses towards the others. It's impossible because, you know, if one exports more than he imports, then another one has to have a deficit. And that's, in fact, what happened. Germany was pushing its exports, so the others started to import more. And because they imported more than they exported over a long run, they, of course, had to take up loans from Germany because we had these export surpluses. So what in fact happened with the Agenda 2010 was to aggravate the euro crisis. And you could even say that the euro crisis was just born out of this Agenda 2010 because we had all these export surpluses. Now it's completely crazy to think that exactly this Agenda 2010 could be the solution for whole of Europe. No, of course it can't.
Andreas Rinke, it's a bold statement she's making.
I don't agree at all because I think that if you look at the figures, the export from Germany is going, the major increases is not going to the Eurozone. It's going to countries outside the Eurozone. And I remind you that countries like Portugal, for example, they had very good export industries, textile industries, but they drove up their wages so enormously that they were still not any longer competitive. And I think that's the problem. Of course they import products, I think also from Germany, and we import and would like to import products from them. But they have to produce products which are still competitive in a globalized market. And there were a lot of countries, it's scrapped down now, I think in most of the countries, which had a link of the wages to inflation. If you do something like that and you don't link it to competitiveness, of course you will have a number of years where people are happy because they get a wage increase every year, and then you suddenly discover that your industry is not competitive anymore.
Yeah, but the problem
That's exactly what happened.
That Germany didn't link its wages to competitiveness either. You know, we had competitiveness was rising like this, and the wages were just going like this. So you know,
well, if you measure
Germany should have the wages in Germany should have risen according to competitiveness, which they didn't. But so you know, the export surpluses started to grow.
I think it depends where you measure competitiveness. If you measure competitiveness between Germany and Portugal, you're right. If you measure competitiveness between Germany and rising markets like China, I think it was correct not to increase the wages too quickly.
Hannah Cleaver, the German Parliament just recently passed the fiscal pact with the help and aid of the opposition as well. But now the German Constitutional Court is going to decide very soon if it's indeed lawful, if this pact, if this law was indeed lawful, because there are some plaintiffs who are saying we are against giving up too much powers to Brussels, and those complaints are being currently heard. Are those intricacies, judicial intricacies, something that countries outside of Germany sufficiently understand and appreciate?
No, I'm sure they're not. I mean, the parliamentary intricacies of Germany are not understood elsewhere, and often actually not even here.
Which is true.
But they are important, and the fact that the Constitutional Court is looking at this and could rule against the government, if you like, is a really important marker for German democracy. And to hear Helmut Schmidt the other day actually personally urging the Constitutional Court to jump over itself and, just to get on with it was really quite shocking. I mean, it's not his place to do that. And the conduct of the court and the way that people and politicians are reacting to that, I think, is very instructive in the state of German democracy. But of course, nobody outside of Germany should be expected to really get a handle on that.
So the countries abroad might not get a handle of that, but what countries outside the UK struck rather by surprise was the statement by UK Prime Minister David Cameron, who said that if it goes this way for much longer, the UK might leave the EU altogether.
Right. I mean, expand the English Channel, to sit there and kick to get the island away from the rest of Europe. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say. There's no way that the UK can leave the European Union. It just wouldn't work. Cameron, I think, there was playing absolutely to his domestic audience. He's got this I hate to say it, insane Tory party behind him, urging him to stand tough and to really show those Europeans what's going on. But I think it's a measure of his lack of ability to really get a grasp of what's important in Europe, that he could say such a thing.
But Ulrike Herrmann, should we be worried overall, not just because of the statement made by UK Prime Minister David Cameron, but overall, if you look at the Greek elections, the prior one, there are a lot of parties now coming into existence and gaining a lot of votes for taking a tough line, anti-EU line?
No, I think that most Europeans know that it's better to have a EU. And I mean, that's something, just as Mr. Rinke quoted, many Europeans do not trust their own government that much. I mean, I think most Europeans are quite happy to know that there's another controlling body above their own governments. I mean, it's always nice to have a nationalistic feeling. It's nice to somehow be in favor of your own football team when it comes to a European soccer game. But my personal feeling is that the Europeans would feel very endangered if the EU would no longer exist, because they know that they somehow only stand a chance in this global economy if they stand together. And I think that's exactly the reason why the UK will stay in the EU, because this small island all on its own, I mean, it's just ludicrous.
Well, then it would almost become a kind of, an offshore island of its own. It would become its own kind of larger Isle of Man, just full of bankers, dodging taxes, and you'd have this kind of crazy little island all on itself, counting its money, but not really taking part in anything else. It would be pointless.
And the question really would be how much money they could count, because
But I think Cameron, nevertheless, he touched a very sensible point, because as the trickiest task in the EU at the moment, I think, is how do you coordinate a deeper integration in the Eurozone and the rest of the EU.
That's true, yeah.
That's the point I think he mentioned. I mean, he's, as you correctly say, under pressure by the Tories, but he knows as well that Britain is just staying behind a dramatic new integration step. And this banking supervision, for example, that will be just for the Eurozone. We have a banking supervision that's sitting in London for the whole of the EU. It doesn't work, obviously.
Not at all.
So we will get an own one. But what does that mean for the common market? Do we have in the future two different rules for banks in the Eurozone.